Welcome back to The Spark is Love. We have a juicy conversation lined up. We have the beautiful Dawn Jones. Dawn, we're just going to get into it. We always have great conversations, and the topic of this conversation is nurses caring for nurses. So come on, nurses, this is time to rise, and we're going to have a really good conversation. But let me introduce Dawn. Dawn, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
Sure. Thank you so much, Kasey, for having me. It's like you said, we start a conversation and then we just get into these moments where we're just snapping it out because we just are feeling this pull to just empower each other better. I was going through my little kids' books, and I had a book that my mom kept for me. And when I was in first grade, and I was 6 years old, it had that little line that said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I wrote a mom and a nurse. And I don't know why don't have any nurses in my family, but I think that I knew in that lack of domestication that says, here's how you're supposed to be, that I intuitively knew that I was going to wind up in a caring profession. So I wound up going to college for nursing. And it wasn't an easy path for me because I was very much sick in my mental thinking. So it took some struggling for me to get to it because I was more about the college scene and the partying and not much about the academics. But I got there because it meant a lot to me. I didn't want to give up on it because I knew from a very young age that this was my soul's calling. And when we have a longing, it's really our soul speaking. It's not just what's going on here. We drop down into here. And when that longing comes along, we know that it's something bigger than us. Mm-hmm. So I wound up getting my degree from Bloomsburg University in Pennsylvania in 1995. At the time, I couldn't find a job in a hospital. So I wound up in a nursing home, which I just thought I would have to pay my dues, but I knew that there was something more. So I wound up getting a newspaper and looking for a job in Salt Lake City in the newborn ICU, which I knew I wanted to do. Wound up getting a job in the NICU for 14 years. I practiced there. Then I went on to do trach vent kids in pediatric home health. Next, I moved on to dialysis because I was working nights. I pretty much worked nights for about 16 years, and it was taking its toll on me. Yeah. So I did dialysis. I did dialysis only after donating my kidney to my friend who was a nurse because I knew that she was tethered to a peritoneal dialysis machine at night, and I couldn't imagine how she couldn't get to her kids at night if they needed her, and that was intolerable to me. So Grace stepped in and allowed me to be a match to my neighbor and a friend who's a nurse. And then I wound up, after doing acute dialysis for a while, I went on to work for Gift of Life, which is the organ transplant company that is in our area, and was a transplant coordinator until March of 2020 when I acquired COVID. My entire family got sick, and I, in an attempt to control everything, just like a good nurse, I was caring for everybody else, but wasn't paying attention to my own care, and wound up with compassion fatigue from holding a lot of hands of dying people alone in the hospital to trying to figure out how I was going to keep my family alive, and wound up with PTSD and have been on a healing journey ever since. So, I'm watching what's going on out there. I'm seeing a lot of nurses who don't know how to care for themselves. And I see the mirror shining back on me and knowing that we can do this better. So my calling now is to help nurses heal from the trauma that they've sustained, because this isn't a new thing. COVID's just the tipping point. We've been burning out for a really long time, and people are talking about nurses need to be more resilient. And the problem is that in our resilience, we are innovative, and we are innovative to the point of injury because we are working to make sure we're working to make a broken system look like it's working, right? And they'll continue to take advantage of us until we continue to burn out. And I feel like our profession is taking a hit right now. We're looking at almost a dying profession because we lack professional accountability. Like, in many hospitals, we're still just the line of a bed charge. So if you want to wonder how we're getting paid by hospital systems, when they charge for a bed, one of the line items underneath is typically nursing.
Yes. I don't know if your story, like we were talking in the past, I've never known you before now we're together, we're trying to transform healthcare, we're trying to look out for our fellow nurses. When you think about nursing, we're always caring for everyone. We're always giving, giving, giving. But the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, when everything shut down, I don't know, but it sounds like you were just like me. When I was looking at the news, I felt it in my stomach for the nurses. I knew that this is going to be very hard for the nurses, and not because of what they were talking about in the news. Yes, the shortage of equipment was a problem, but it wasn't just because of that. You see, I realized the public they didn't realize how much strain nurses were under just on an everyday basis. We frequently work without. We frequently, like you say, innovate and create where there is nothing, where there's budget cuts, and we've been doing it for so long, and obviously we've been doing such a good job of it.
Right.
People didn't realize that there's a deeper problem, there's a bigger problem within healthcare, especially the nursing field. So now you got to face it face on with a burnout, not just burnout, but you said you had PTSD and compassion fatigue. So you experienced that. What was that like for you? What helped you get out of it?
So I'm just going to comment on something that you said, because a lot of people, if one more person says to me, this is what you signed up for when you became a nurse, I'm going to strangle them, because, just because we do it, it's because we care so much to make sure people live, and we're caring for families, and we're caring for individuals. And I know for me, how I got into that position was I was so busy caring for my family that I didn't even know that I had no skills to care for myself. Self-compassion felt selfish. Self-compassion felt a little bit dangerous, because that means I would have to feel all of those other things. And, nurses aren't afraid to die, because we'll walk into the fire and into the room and continue to, and not go home to our families because we don't want to put them at risk. So we'll just stay at hotels during COVID, and who's supporting us? We're constantly allowing, the outside to be what is needed. And when we're called to care for ourselves, we feel like, well, I'm going to go care harder for them then, because I feel like that's how I am, but it's not true. It's not true. Because I think in life, the majority of the world is realizing that, like, as the world was sat down all at once, everybody was just put in their space, and everyone got a little pause to reevaluate, like, what's working and what's not. Because as I go back to this and just faced all of that mortality, is working this hard worth giving up what I just got a pause to revisit as a gift? So in my healing, I found a call to care for others, because while I was home healing, one of the biggest stressors to me was knowing that I couldn't get back out there and help my colleagues. I knew my colleagues were struggling. But I knew I was struggling too. And everything in me said, get back out there. And I had a physician so I wasn't sleeping. I was having panic attacks. I was all over the place. I literally I could get to the bathroom and back to my bed, not because of physical illness, but because of this. And then my doctor disempowered me, knowing I'm a nurse. She said, they need you back out there. So she would not back me up to say that I was struggling with mental illness and thus keeping me from obtaining short-term disability. So now I'm not getting paid. My doctor basically told me I'm faking. And I said to her flat out, I said, did you say I'm faking? And she's like, you know what? I'm going to be honest. I think that you are. I think you just don't want to get back to work. I was like, you have no idea. You have no idea. And the moral injury that caused to me in that moment was a borderline sentinel event, right? So neglect from healthcare providers that creates a worsening effect on a patient. Because in that dark place, when I couldn't help and my doctor couldn't back me up, I didn't want to kill myself, but I didn't know what else to do. And the epidemic of nurses committing suicide right now because they can't unsee what they've seen and they need to drink themselves to sleep and they need to figure out how to go back the next day. And it's all too big. It's all too big. And we need to learn to empower each other best. And who would empower a nurse best but another nurse? Because don't tell me that I don't want to get back out there and help. I show up for nurses at work. I don't show up for patients first and foremost, because if I don't show up for work, I screw my colleagues.
You know, Dawn, I think you're speaking your truth and you're speaking it loud. And if anybody has been a nurse or in healthcare, I think they know what you're talking about, because I know what you're talking about. And it's hard for people to understand if they haven't been out there. But it's important for them to understand, because you're a nurse coach. That's what your credentials are. And you're also, I'm sorry, I probably put it the wrong way, but you're also a compassion CCP?
A certified compassion fatigue professional, right?
Okay, so you took this, because we could be a bunch of nurses here complaining and saying it's not right. We're watching our colleagues; they're heading down a very dangerous path. You know, as this pandemic wears on, you know, people are making issues of things that aren't really issues for nurses. You know, as persons, as people, we are more interested in the mental, emotional health, the wellness, the well-being of the nurse when they walk home, when they leave the job. What type of person are we sending home to their families when they're finished traveling? What type of person are we sending home? Not just, oh, they're afraid of dying. We're afraid. Before the pandemic, we were faced with death daily. One stick, you can get a stick from a needle. You can get there. So you have patients with mental illness. I've been attacked. I'm sure you have your own experience too. So death is nothing that is new. That is not a new fear. But what we're looking at from our perspective as nurses, we are worried about the well-being, the health, the mental health, the emotional health of our fellow nurses. And we're not here to complain. We're not here to gather like a group and overthrow the system. No. We're here to say, hey, we're stepping and we're taking a different look. Somebody has to stop the madness. You know, a lot of hospitals right now, I know they're trying to retain the nurses. They're trying to hold on to the nurses. And we absolutely need nurses out there on the front lines. But we also need nurses like you, Dawn, nurses like me, who step aside and say, hey, we want to advocate for our fellow nurses. We want to advocate for our profession. We know what it's like, and we don't need someone who's never been a nurse to help a nurse. And because it can lead to more damage. You can do a lot of injury if you're trying to help someone that doesn't really understand what it's like, not just in the situation at the hospital, but what's going on in the mind of a nurse and the mind of not just a nurse, but a nurse and assistant, a caregiver whose heart, whose calling is to help another person, you can do a lot of damage trying to help. So this is why we're here. We're having this conversation. And if you're
Yes.
joining us, welcome in. Put in the comments what you've been through. We want to hear your struggles. And we're here. Tell us what you're doing, Dawn. Tell us what you're involved with. Tell us what resources are there for our nurses.
So I have done a ton of personal work. I think therapy is really important. I think community is really important. I think that nursing doesn't necessarily congregate as a fellowship in the way that, we do on the units, and we've got our work wives and our work sisters, and this is our chosen family. Not many nurses will tell you that they don't work with another nurse, and because we're vulnerable quickly. I'm able to help you and hear you and hold space for you and see you where you are, and then you see me where I am too. But what's happening is with PPE, with isolation rooms, we're not able to gather on top of the patient load, on top of finding time for a meal break. It's right. There's fewer people out there to back us up. So we're less likely to be able to do that unpacking. So what I've been doing is I was taking I did a mindful self-compassion for healthcare providers course from a Dr. Kristen Neff, who works on self-compassion. And I wound up going forward and getting the compassion fatigue training. And if you want, I could take you through a really easy process that a nurse can do in 30 seconds that talks about soothing and supportive touch. Because we know that what touch does for a patient. You've seen, I don't know if you saw the hot glove that was tied together and put around a dying person's hand that had warm water in it, so someone felt like someone was holding their hand in the COVID time, because, we're not able to stand there and hold hands, but we know the gift of touch, and especially now in these times, it's really hard. So the calling is to give it to ourselves, to come to ourselves. So if we're feeling badly and we need to offer a comfort and soothing touch, so what we're going to do this little practice. You want to do it with me?
Yes.
Okay. So you notice when you're under stress, which is like, 12 hours of a 12-hour shift. So at any point during that time, if it comes to you, and this is part of like our spiritual well-being, if we're given the gift of insight that says, you know what, slow down for a second, then maybe this is something you can do, because I think that we're being guided to care for ourselves eventually. I think that we just push it away as a habit because we're so busy for caring everyone else. So when you're under stress, just take 2 or 3 deep breaths. And gently place a hand over your heart and just feel the gentle pressure and warmth of your hand and recognize it as a supportive gesture. If you wish, you can place both hands over your heart and feel that natural rise and fall of your chest as you breathe in and as you breathe out. And just linger there as long as you'd like. And that's it. Sometimes people find if you're sitting at the computer and you just put your hand to the side of your face and cup your face. And the important part is to recognize that what I'm doing right now is a conscious, supportive effort for myself. And much like compassion, so we're constantly giving compassion. And what we don't recognize is that we're empaths. Many nurses are empaths. So we take on the feelings of the other patient. So it's important that as we're continuing to accumulate the feelings of the patient, that we not only just give and give and give, but it's like an infinity sign. So we give to you, but I got to come back and give to me too. And I'm going to give to you. And maybe you're critical right now. So I'm giving to you. But when I'm done that, I've got to come back to me and either, check in with myself and say, you know what, you did the best you could, talk to myself like I would talk to a loving friend or I would talk to another colleague. We don't always get those moments. So we think of this infinity symbol that says, I'm going to give to you, and then I'm going to give to me, and I'm going to give to you. And we feel like it might be a little bit selfish to take that pause. But I think what we're finding in nursing right now is that we need to slow down to provide better patient care, because I think there's so many little things that we might miss if we're in a big rush in nursing. I don't know that we're meant to rush. Florence Nightingale, I have a quote pulled up. She was known as the ministering angel. Without any exaggeration in this hospitals, as her slender form glides gently along each corridor, every poor fellow's face softens with gratitude at the sight of her. And when all medical officers have retired for the night and the silence and darkness has settled down upon those miles of prostrate sick, she may be observed alone with a little lamp in her hand, making her solitary rounds. And that's what we do. We're constantly serving others, and we forget, and we're not taught. And I think that's part of like what my calling is, to remind nurses, you know what? Who's in the room when you're serving the patient? The patient and me.
Yeah.
I'm in the room. I forget I'm in the room. And self-forgetting allows us to be able to find. In self-forgetting, we can find ourselves, because in a moment, someone told us, you know what, you're in the room too. And I think that's our job right now, to bring nurses back to ourselves and say, for far too long, we've allowed this treatment to go.
Yeah.
And enough's enough. Like, this is the tipping point. And you said it may not be overturning the system. Kasey, I think it might be overturning the system.
When I first came to the United States, I was about 18, and I had the privilege to tend to an older lady. She was in her 80s, and she was a nurse back in the day. And when she told me about what nursing was back in the day, it's very different from what it is today. And I realized that for us to have nurses who are being paid well, who are treated with some semblance of respect, for us to be even recognized as a profession, a lot of nurses, they protested. They protested for innovation and for change and for acceptance. When I say not overturning the system, I mean, this is not a platform for protest. This is not, we're not saying, hey, we want you to change. We want this system to change. I actually think when nurses become healthy, they will be able to deliver healthcare. And I gave a speech. I don't think it's about like making modifications to the system that we've had. I think it's building an entirely new system, an entirely new system. So, but before a new system has to change, I think each person, each individual, unfortunately, have to realize that I am a person, and if I care about healthcare, I have to care about my health first. It's like Michael Jackson say, if you want to make a change, you got to start right here, right? Look at the man in the mirror, and I think that's what you're doing. I think that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do it within my community. Really looking just within my community. It's a retirement, a place where a lot of people come to retire, and not necessarily wealthy people. So it's rural, it's retirement. So we really need nurses to be healthy in this community, because they're going to get the brunt of it. It's not a big city. It's 2 hours away from anything specialized or up and coming. So I'm really concerned as a community member just for the nurses. And if the
Mhm.
hospitals aren't able to source nurses or keep nurses, retain nurses, it's not just their problem, it's the community's problem. But
Exactly.
unfortunately, if you're not aware of healthcare, of even your own healthcare, that's a big concept for just the lay person to understand. So I feel called as a nurse to say, hey, let's take care of the people who are caring for us, because
Right.
one day we're going to need them, and that day might come very soon, and we need them to be healthy. We need them to be healthy.
But it starts with, so you look at a lot of nurses, we're eating poorly, we're not sleeping well, we don't have time to work out. So, like you said, if we don't practice wellness ourselves, how
Mhm,
can we come from a place of knowing wellness?
mhm.
How can we be trusted to care for you when it's obvious that sometimes I don't care for me, you
Yes,
know?
yes.
And it's not our fault, because we're so used to putting everyone else first, and it's very noble, seemingly, but
Mhm,
it's very dangerous,
mhm, mhm,
and it's time to start recognizing. And I was on a call yesterday that talked about innovation, about how we don't need nurses to actually be more resilient. What we need to do is start looking at things like nursing hours. In times when it's known to be very busy, can we have a 4-hour nurse come in and help lighten the load during those busy times?
mhm, mhm.
Can we cut down to 8 or 10 hour days? Some of these differences that we can start to look at, because if you asked any 9 to 5er to work a 12-hour day, they would laugh at you.
Mhm.
But because we've done this for so long, then we accept it as, this is what you signed up for. And I think we're doing a disservice to the younger population of nurses, because you talked about retention.
Mhm.
They're not going to stick around.
Mhm.
They're going to come out, because these Gen Zs, they really do respect their personal time.
Yeah.
Their personal time is very important to them. And the work-life balance in nursing has been unsustainable for at least the 27 years that I've been a nurse.
Wow. Wow.
Right?
Wow. You make a good point. And that's something I'm actually really trying to get to, is going to the schools, the nursing schools with the
Mhm.
new nursing students, because as nurses, if we have a patient, let's just put this in very simple terms. If we have a patient and our patient is bleeding out, right? You know, people are thinking, oh, we need to hang, get more blood, pump more blood, hang IV fluid, hang blood transfusion. Like, we need to get their fluids up. But as a nurse, we're thinking, let's hold pressure. Let's stop the bleed, right?
Mhm.
And let's help get to the root of the problem. What's causing the bleed, right? What's really going on, And that's just like a simple illustration, but it goes to show, like, right now, if we're bleeding nurses out, the solution is not to. And I know it looks really nice. These companies are offering a lot of money to nurses, and they can travel, and they're getting their needs filled. But that's a solution, but it's not a long-term solution, and it's not a very viable solution for the nursing profession, because we got to figure out why are we bleeding in the first place. And a
Right.
lot of it for nurses, we could talk about the long hours. We could talk about the tough patients that we have, the tough cases, the mortality. But I think, Dawn, and I don't know if you will agree with me, the mental stress that we have as nurses, where we are not respecting ourselves, our
Mhm.
health. And I think the realization and the awareness that we have lives, we have families, we're also going through things in our personal lives. And then we're taking all of this on, and then people don't really care about us, as the value of our human lives is not really it just being really authentic, I just always felt like replaceable. Like if something
Mhm.
happened to me, okay, that's sad, but let's keep it moving. If you have a problem, you are easily replaceable. And I feel as though the value of the person as a nurse is has been eroded and deteriorated so much that it takes only, a lot of people are, the money is what keeps them going.
Right,
They're in
right,
it for the money now because all the values have been deteriorated.
right.
So
So I have an invitation to maybe a solution in that will serve, that I personally am engaging in, that might serve our future of nursing and our current place of nursing. And it's nurse student mentorship. So I have taken on a nurse student mentee, and one nurse at a time. I think that we can make a commitment to the future of nursing. And in that space where I'm holding her up, I'm actually feeling more value in what I have to offer. And I don't feel replaceable in that moment, because the amount of time that we spend in our profession is our value, right? So when we acquire time, and time, the acronym is like this, I must earn. It takes time to really get there. But if you have a mentor to carry you along the way, to let you know that we see that there needs to be change, and I want to empower you to know that it doesn't have to be this way either. And we can start to empower this new life that's coming into nursing to not accept it the way that it was. We kind of both hold our values. So I really would invite everybody to see if there is, and like you said, we have lives outside of this, but if we don't start addressing this at the core of it, then we are never going to have a job that we love to go to. Like nursing can be a job that we love again, but we've really set ourselves up in a position to just be a nurse. And I can't tell you how many times I've said, well, I'm just a nurse. When the doctors don't think we're just nurses, the administrators don't think we're just nurses. This is the language we use against ourselves, and it needs to change. And if we can empower that young nurse, that junior provider, to be empowered to not use that kind of language and trust that it can be better, and that we're going to start working towards this way to get back to a profession that we admire in ourselves, and not one, because there's two sides of what you were saying. People are not loving their job, but they're also not staying because their leadership isn't there. So it's up to nurses to show up as leaders to fellow nurses, because our management is really kind of failing us as well.
Yes, yes. And I think a lot of that has to do with even recognizing that increased education, because you are educated does not mean that you know how to do the job, that you actually have the practical skills and the interpersonal skills, and actually the caring skills. You could have just gone up the ladder, but it does not mean that you're really qualified for what you're doing.
Right. And these managers, I don't envy them at all. They're being pulled in all different directions because they've got to meet this like budget number. Yeah. And then they see these nurses working themselves to literal death. Like, I would hate to be in that position. So there's so many levels that need to be addressed, but
it's an impossible situation. But I do think that it is possible for every person to take responsibility for their own self and their own health, especially mental health.
That's the call.
Especially mental health. But another thing that I am seeing happening, where I have even had the opportunity to meet you, is that now nurses are joining together in community. So before we didn't really have, like, not everybody is a member of the American Nurses Association, and that's
Right.
for many different reasons. But I'm seeing communities pop up like nursestransforminghealthcare.org or Nurse Tech community, where nurses are sharing their experiences. And even you were talking about this mentor. Was that a community, or is that something that you're doing separately?
It was from a nursing school. They were reaching out and in the Pennsylvania area
Okay.
to help these young nurses to feel because clinical right now is incredibly challenging.
Yes,
You
yes,
know,
yes.
so how are we going to reach these nurses and help them to not say, "I'm afraid of failing nursing school because it's so hard. I'm
Mhm.
afraid to go out into the workplace because it's so hard."
Yes, it's true. And I know it because currently my husband is in nursing school. So I see both sides. I see
No
both sides.
joke.
And I don't envy them. I don't envy them. Everybody has it really hard, but it's such a noble profession. And it's a profession that it's not just we're trying to save our jobs or we're trying to make it more enjoyable. It goes deeper than this. Nursing touches humanity. If all the nurses tomorrow disappeared, society will have serious problems,
Right.
serious problems. So nurses as a collective, we really need to come together and rally together, not just to fix a broken system, but to really operate at the height of what we were called for, what we were called to do. I don't know if this is resonating with you, but you let me know.
No, 100%. I love so Nurses Transforming Healthcare. Leanne Meyer is one of the members. She has a podcast
Yeah.
called Once a Nurse, Always a Nurse. And I had the pleasure of being on that a couple weeks ago with a group that I've come along with. It's a startup called Happy,
Uh-huh.
and they are providing mental health work and support for nurses. They actually support anybody who wants to call in on a dedicated line.
Mhm.
But the ANA has joined with Happy to go ahead and allow any nurse or any nursing student to get free online mental health support at any time. So they are able to reach out to a dedicated line. So if you've had a crappy shift and you need to unpack it because if you don't get this off your chest, then you're going to unload it on your family, you can call. There's a dedicated line for nurses, and it's 833-327-0262. And any nurse and any nursing student can call, and it's funded by the ANA, and that you will speak to a live person. They don't give support. It's not therapy. It's just a matter of someone on the line saying, "How are you? I'm
Mhm.
here for it. Just go ahead and talk."
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I am a nurse liaison
Mhm.
with Happy. So like we said, nurses empower nurses best.
Yeah.
So I am taking calls directly from nurses, and
Mm.
it's fascinating because I have nurses telling me that by healing, they're healing, right? And it's really interesting because only a nurse can know that when we go and heal others, but also look at the healing of ourselves, do we allow healing to actually happen? And we really have to allow healing.
Yes.
So any nurse can call me and get or text me and set up a line for support. And that number is 717-397-0937.
And I have it. So I'll put it in my bio. I'll put it in
Okay.
the description box. I'll put all the resources in the description
Okay.
box. Because what I'm
Yeah.
doing as a community nurse, what I'm doing is I'm actually trying to get out there, and first and foremost to the healthcare field and let them know about the resources that are available. And within the community, what I'm doing is I want to give them these resources. I want to give them this community, but I also want to give them practical things within the community that they can go to, that they can visit. So I'll put all of this information, all of this good stuff in the description. As we wrap up this interview, do you have any last minute words. You know, as nurses, sometimes we know what we need to do. We can be so stubborn. We can be so stubborn. What any last minute words you want to share with your nurses out there?
I have a favorite quote. It's from Henry David Thoreau, and it says, "Go confidently in the direction of your dreams," right? And I think as nurses, our dream is to really just care for others and be able to help them to have the best life. And I think it's a good lesson for nurses to recognize that we're also in the room. So the call is to really care for ourselves so we can come from an authentic place of caring, because we know what that caring looks like, and we know it can be messy, and we know it can be sloppy, and we know it can be a challenge, but it's the same challenge that we're expecting the people that we're looking to empower to get well. We can come from a place of knowing because we've done the work ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's so important for us to recognize that it's our job, not only to care for others, but it's our job to care for ourselves.
That's true. That is very true. That is very true. And as we nurse humanity back to health, we love having speakers like you. Thank you so much for joining our YouTube channel. And
It's been a pleasure.
I wish you success, and we will keep in contact.
Yes, for sure. Yes.
Okay.
Everybody keep up the good work.